Hey there guys, welcome back to Doug and Racecraft YouTube channel. On this episode, I give you the definitive guide to Predator swapping your Coyote engine. Alright, I just want to make a quick video because the most common question I've been getting since I've embarked on the Supercharger journey is what's required to do it to my Gen X 1, 2, 3, whatever Coyote. So there's a couple things that are generation specific to get these superchargers to work on your engine. I'm going to go over those in this video. There's also a couple things that you should know before getting into it that is standard across all generations Coyote. So first we're going to start off with the Generation 1 Coyote. It's probably the most straightforward of all three generations to do. I don't have a lot of information about Gen 4s yet, so you'll have to come back for a future video if that's what you're here for. So Gen 1s, the supercharger will just bolt onto the cylinder heads. No modification was required to get the thing to bolt on. The main thing that you're gonna have to do with the Gen 1 is obviously the blower drive, which I went over in a previous video, but I'll just give you some key points here really quick. Most Gen 1 engines don't have a tensioner for the AC compressor, so they have just a stretch fit belt. What I would recommend doing for a Gen 1 is going to a Gen 2 timing cover and using VMP's boomerang bracket. They did supply me with a boomerang bracket for my setup, but even if they hadn't, this is far and above the best way to put a supercharger belt on your Coyote, assuming you don't already have a Predator setup. And to be completely honest, even if I did have a Predator setup, which I did before and got rid of everything so I could use VMP's parts, even if I had a GT500, I would still convert to the GT timing cover and use this boomerang bracket. It's just far and above. You get the most belt wrap, the most belt security and everything like that for the supercharger setups. As for an induction side of the supercharger, the GT500 supercharger housing uses the same throttle body pattern as the Hellcats. So what VMP recommends doing is using a Hellcat throttle body, whether it be stock or VMP also offers an aftermarket one that's 105 millimeters. Pretty good piece in my opinion. And they also offer a Hellcat throttle body adapter. So the plugs are the same, but the pinouts are not the same between the two superchargers. So they do offer a plug and play setup, which is what they ended up offering me and what I ended up using on my car. I know a couple people have looked into making adapters, and honestly, it's just not worth it in my opinion. You put the throttle body out that much further away from the supercharger, which in my case, I wouldn't be able to put a charge tube on. So it's a nice, easy, clean cut way to get a throttle body on. The main problem with the throttle body for the GT500s is 2011 to 2017 Mustangs use an analog style throttle body, whereas 18 and up use a digital style. So that's the main hurdle you need to overcome, and that's the easiest way to do it from what I've seen. Whether you plan on doing an 8-rib or a 6-rib setup, the GT500 style setup uses the 8-rib rear sheave for the supercharger drive, as well as the AC compressor, and a 4-rib sheave for the alternator and water pump. VMP does offer a balancer that allows you to convert to that, and in my opinion is the better option. It's a little bit more expensive than buying just a stock GT500 balancer, but I would easily spend the extra $400 to get an ATI piece that is SFI rated. In all cases, they offer an overdrive, which is obviously better, gets you more belt wrap around the crank, all that good stuff. In either case, even if whether you plan on using their boomerang bracket or a Predator style timing cover, you will need a modified water pump pulley. The back rib of the water pump pulley will end up hitting the either the idler for the boomerang bracket or the idler for the Predator timing cover. Here's my stock water pump pulley. As you can see, the back rib here used to look like this rib here. Obviously you need to grind that off, and it was still nearly touching that idler. So VMP offers a ground down or obviously a modified water pump pulley. You could also use a GT500 one. I would go with the VMP one because then that would still allow you to use a 6-rib belt in the event that you were still going to use the 6-rib and 6-rib. Another thing you might want to look into doing is using the heater tube from a GT500. The heater tube that comes off of the water pump on a GT500 is taller and it moves away from the throttle body. I was able to just move mine away, bend it out of the way a little bit, but if you're looking for a nice clean install, I recommend picking up that piece. In any case, I also recommend upgrading to VMP's 8-rib kit. It uses a significantly heavier duty tensioner to put a lot more tension on the belt. And the factory AC compressor tensioner doesn't put enough tension on the belt, in my opinion. And you'll get a lot of belt slip that way. So VMP offers a pretty inexpensive route to go with a 8-rib conversion kit. So that's gonna do for the Gen 1s. Let's move on to the Gen 2s. The Gen 2s take a little bit more work. So on the Gen 2s, the intake manifold flange is a little bit wider, and that was to accommodate the IMRCs for the Gen 2 Coyotes. That requires a little bit of trimming. even if you end up going back to a Gen 2 Coyote, you don't need the extra surface area that's on that cylinder head. So you're really not hurting anything by modifying that just a little bit. If you don't want to turn the cylinder head, you can go ahead and find Coyote intake manifold spacers. You need to space it up at least 1 inch to avoid the cylinder head flange. But in my opinion, it's way easier just to take a little cutoff wheel and cut off a little bit of meat on the cylinder head. That's the main thing you need to overcome with the Gen 2 Coyotes. As for the belt drive, it's pretty much the same as what I offered in the Gen 1 Coyote part of this video. I would much rather use a car timing cover than a truck timing cover. The truck timing cover doesn't have the idler that the Boss 02 and the Predators use for the accessory belts, which in my opinion, I just like the way it looks more. It's more functional, all that good stuff. So I would highly recommend picking up a car timing cover yet again. As for the AC compressor drive, you'll obviously need to find an 8-rib or a 6-rib AC compressor if your vehicle has a 4-rib compressor, which I know Gen 2 trucks and Gen 3 trucks also have 4-rib AC compressors. Yet again, also recommend picking up the VMP GT500 ATI damper, a far superior option versus the stock Mustang balancer or the Predator balancer, which is, I think it's normally about $700. I got mine for $100 because I had a ton of Ford Pass points to use up from when I had some warranty work done. Had I not gotten it for nearly free, I would have much rather bought the GT500 one. And I'll still probably end up buying the one from VMP anyways, just because it's a better option. Obviously, throttle body is still the same situation. What I ended up doing on my Gen 2 is using a BBK Hellcat throttle body, 100mm, picked up really cheap. It was brand new for $200, so I really couldn't go wrong there. Like I said, you can either pick up a stock one or VMP offers a 105mm one. So moving on to the Gen 3, which takes, in my opinion, the most legwork to get done, but can still be done. I've seen it done a couple times now on a couple trucks and a couple Mustangs, one of which was tuned by Palm Beach, another one tuned by Lund. So it is doable. Like I said, it just takes a little bit more legwork to get the supercharger to physically bolt onto the engine. The bottom of the supercharger case will hit the DI rails unless you space obviously the supercharger manifold up off the cylinder heads. What I've seen is 1.5 inch spacer works pretty well. There's one company that I know that readily makes these. They're readily available. I'll put their website on the screen right now. I don't remember what it's called offhand, but they make Coyote intake manifold spacers. So obviously with that being the hardest part about it, still not even really that hard. Just, you gotta spend a little bit more money. I think the spacers are about $400. So still, I mean, pretty reasonable price if you can get one of these superchargers for what they were selling for a couple months ago. I know Ford recently increased the price to about $8,500. So obviously a little bit cost inhibitive now, but you can still pick up a factory unit for, takeoff for one of these for, I've seen them selling for $2,500 with a throttle body, with injectors, with fuel rails, all that good stuff still on them. So as with the Gen 2s, Gen 3s, you're gonna need to figure out an AC drive, because I know at least on my truck, I'm not sure how the Mustangs are, the AC drive is a 4-rib, which is obviously not gonna be enough for the supercharger setup. At least gonna need a 6-rib, and even with the 6-rib, you're still gonna have a little bit of belt slip. So as for an AC compressor setup, I know you could switch to the GT500 style AC compressor that already has the 8-rib belt on it. I think that's about $400. Otherwise, I know VMP also offers the 8-rib conversion setup, which I would highly recommend. Balancer, same situation. Recommend the VMP one over the GT500 one, far and above, just a better piece. Nice thing about doing it on a Gen 3 is that you could use a stock GT500 throttle body, so you don't need to use a throttle body adapter, harness adapter to convert the signal, all that good stuff. So it would be plug and play in that regard. The GT500 throttle bodies are still pretty easy to come by. You can find stock ones, you can find aftermarket ones. They're pretty plentiful. So if there's anything that you think that I missed in this video, please go ahead and feel free to leave a comment down below. There's still a couple things that I'd like to go over that are universal across all generations, and I'm gonna do that here in just one second. Like I said, have any comments, questions, leave a comment down below. But anyways, let's keep going. Okay, so the main reason these superchargers were so cheap in the first place was because of these here. On factory GT500s, these holes here go, and it's, same thing on the other side. These holes go all the way through these bosses and down into the cylinder head. Whereas on these blowers, for whatever reason, Ford decided that they were just gonna be drilled, about 1 inch down into the case and tap. I don't see an issue with running it that way. Personally, I ended up having my supercharger and the other superchargers that a friend of mine had. I had them drilled out by a late model throttle up in Waukesha, Wisconsin. He was more than reasonable about it. Charged me $150 to drill these through. Obviously put it in a mill, drill and ream them. So now they're obviously bolted all the way down. As you can see there's the holes there. These dowels, that's the other thing that needs to be done. On the cylinder heads, those dowels that I just showed you, there's holes in the cylinder head. These are 380 thousandths on these blowers, and normally they're about 340,000. So you will need to pick up a drill bit, drill out the dowels in your cylinder head so that the supercharger surface will seal onto the cylinder head. Otherwise, those dowels will hold the supercharger off the surface and it won't seal. Like I said, you probably could get away without drilling these out, but that would mean that you just have 3 bolts on each side holding the supercharger down. Granted, this is a pretty heavy, unit. These units weigh about 100 pounds a piece. So you do have 100 pounds pushing down on these, but at the same time, you're gonna have 14 pounds of boost pushing down the other way, pushing these up. And I just didn't really trust that, for how cheap these superchargers were when I picked mine up. An extra 250 bucks to have the supercharger disassembled and have the holes reamed. You really can't beat it. You're only in these for 500 bucks. It's a pretty good deal. Another thing, most tuners will not touch your setup, touch supercharged setup, unless it has an IAT2 harness, which VMP offers. I think they're one of the only people that offer that harness. So what this does is it takes the MAF signal that obviously goes to the MAF sensor, which is going to be somewhere up here or here, depending upon your orientation. The MAF card has an IAT sensor in it, but the problem with having the IAT sensor in the chart or in the air inlet is that it's not the hottest part of the air charge. The hottest part is going to be after the rotors, the compressed air, because the act of compressing air heats it up, and obviously is not great. So in the Gen 1, 2, and 3 computers, they have timing retard per inlet air temp. So you want the measured air to be the hottest part of the air. So you can effectively retard timing if you need to, because you could show 40 degree inlet air temps, but 150 degree charge air temps, and then you're going to detonate and then put your engine at risk of blowing up. So highly recommend these. Most companies are going to make you have one of these regardless. Obviously there's normally a sensor that goes here. Just drilled and tapped that for a 3/8 pipe, which is what this is. Highly recommend doing that. Okay, so another general thing you need to consider with doing these supercharger swaps is you need significantly more fuel system than you did for an NA setup. So first thing being injectors, I went with D-Twerk's 95-pound injectors. You realistically should have at least 1,000 cc's, whether you do E85 or pump gas. Obviously, if you're doing methanol, you're gonna need a much bigger injector than that, but that's a good baseline to get you started. If you plan on staying at stock power levels, running pump gas, the 55-pound injectors that come with GT500 should be more than enough for you, but I know that most tuners will want to see an aftermarket injector in there that's bigger than what comes in those factory. Another thing you need to consider is, so Gen 3 Coyotes obviously have the direct injection, and the direct injection pump needs to see 58 psi at all times. It can't raise. So obviously you need to have 2 separate fuel pressure regulators to ensure that the direct injection pump sees the 58 psi at all times, and then another regulator to obviously increase the fuel pressure for the port injection rails. But anyways, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. If you like the video, like the video. If you have any comments or questions, leave a comment down below. If you'd like to see more of this content, please consider subscribing. It really does help out. If you think I missed anything, please feel free to let me know. I'm hoping this is an all-encompassing video, a one-stop to answer all your questions. So if there's any questions I didn't answer, please feel free to leave a comment down below. But that's gonna do it for this video. I hope to catch you in the next one. Y'all take care now.